This is the VOA Special English Education Report. President Obama sent Congress a proposal in March to rewrite the main federal education law. The current version of the law, signed by George W. Bush 8 years ago, is known as the No Child Left Behind Act. That name would go away. The current policy calls for every student to be able to pass state tests in reading and math by 2014. All schools must show yearly progress toward this goal. But states decide how much students need to know to show proficiency. President Obama's goal is that every student should graduate from high school ready for college and a career. The target date for schools is 2020. The President described the plan in one of his weekly radio and internet addresses. The President said, "What this plan recognizes is that while the federal government can play a leading role in encouraging the reforms and high standards we need, the impetus for that change will come from states and from local schools and school districts." Under the new proposal, states and school systems would compete for federal grants. The idea is similar to the administration's $4 billion race to the top competition to reform schools. Struggling schools could receive money for teacher improvement and for developing plans for success. The lowest performing schools would face changes, such as replacing teachers and the principal, or being closed. The administration sent its general ideas to Congress in what it called a blueprint for reform to develop the next education law. Ann Bryant is executive director of the National School Boards Association. Her group worked with the Department of Education on the plan. She says it is a good start, but still needs work. The plan would reward effective schools and teachers with money and other recognition. But leaders of the nation's largest teachers' unions criticize the administration's blueprint. Dennis Van Rokel of the National Education Association said it still relies on standardized tests to identify winners and losers. He also expressed disappointment that states would have to compete for money. Randy Weingarten of the American Federation of Teachers said the plan appears to place all the responsibility on teachers, but gives them 0% authority. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report. For more programs, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. Next year, the Peace Corps will celebrate its 50th anniversary. Peace Corps volunteers are Americans who teach and work on projects in developing countries. The United States created the Peace Corps during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Today, technology has changed how the volunteers do their work and stay connected with friends and family back home. In the early 1980s, Gordy Mengel served in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Letters from home would take weeks or months. As a result, he socialized more with people in the local community. He lost contact with friends and family back in the States. Today, Gordy Mengel is a Peace Corps programming and training officer in Rwanda. He says these days are different because of the internet and cell phone service. When volunteers go back to their homes in villages, they can get on Skype, or they give a quick call to mom and dad back at home. Sonia Morhanj is one of about 100 Peace Corps volunteers in Rwanda. She talks with a friend in California on Skype, an internet calling service. She talks with her mother on the phone and emails her father. She says, "I can't imagine having been a Peace Corps volunteer in the 70s or the 80s or even the early 90s. I'm just so used to everyone having a cell phone that works internationally. I'm very, very lucky in the fact that where I live, I have wireless internet, and that makes it a lot easier." Peace Corps volunteers receive a living allowance and other benefits in return for 27 months of training and service. John Reddy is the country director in Rwanda. He says fairly easy access to the internet means that volunteers can do more than just call home. They can research subjects to help their communities. And through the Peace Corps Partnership Program, they can get donations online for their projects. But John Reddy admits he sometimes misses the old days, before the internet and good phone service. He says volunteers had more independence then. You can comment on this story and find other education reports online at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and iTunes at VOA Learning English. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. A program in the eastern United States invites young people into a prison to try to scare them away from prison. The goal is to teach them to avoid bad choices and bad influences that could put them behind bars for life. Students can take a tour of the prison in school groups or by themselves. At the end, the young people sit down for a discussion with some of the inmates. The program is called Prisoners Against Teen Tragedy, or PAT. It takes place at the Maryland Correctional Institution, Hagerstown, a medium-security prison for men. Sal Mariello is a case specialist there. He says 11 prisoners are in the PAT program. They tell the students about their crimes. They try to teach them about bad choices. The Prisoners Against Teen Tragedy program also includes an essay writing contest. Tomi Dare is a 17-year-old student at Hagerstown Community College. She saw an announcement for the contest on her college website. To enter, students had to write about pressure from other students and why they do not use drugs. The prize? $500 for school. In her essay, Ms. Dare wrote about her own experience growing up as an African American girl interested in sports. She wrote that drugs and alcohol slow her down and do not make her feel like a winner. The scholarship is presented by the Prisoners Against Teen Tragedy program. Prison spokesman Mark Vernarelli says most teens who visit come to understand what even one bad decision can mean. He says many men and women serving life in prison in the state of Maryland did not shoot a gun or plunge a knife into anybody. They were accessories to a crime. They drove the getaway car. They were with the person who did the main part of the crime. And yet, they got the life sentence as well. Prisoners Against Teen Tragedy began in 1988. PAT is one of Maryland's oldest programs to keep young people from a life of crime. But there are also others. Mr. Vernarelli says there is a special program for girls only. And there is a program where the students eat a meal in the prison cafeteria with the inmates. Mark Vernarelli says the prisoners also gain from the program. It offers them a chance to help repay society for their crimes and keep others from following in their footsteps. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. Today, we remember a man who was considered one of the best teachers in the United States. Jaime Alfonso Escalante was born in 1930 in La Paz, Bolivia. Both his parents were teachers. He taught math and science in his home country for 12 years. In the 1960s, Jaime Escalante and his wife Fabiola came to the United States. During the next several years, he learned to speak English and repeated his college education and teacher training. In 1974, Mr. Escalante was hired at Garfield High School to teach mathematics. The school was in a poor area of Los Angeles, California. Many of the students had serious problems with illegal drugs, gangs, and violence. The school was in danger of losing its official approval to operate. Mr. Escalante's students were mostly Mexican Americans from a Spanish-speaking area of the city. Many were the worst students at the school and thought to be unteachable. But Mr. Escalante pushed the group to work hard. He told them basic math was too easy and that they had the ability to do harder work. He told his students that he believed in them, but they must have the desire to be successful. Jaime Escalante started an advanced math program with a small group of students. Advanced Placement is a program of college-level classes and tests. In 1982, 18 of his students took the Advanced Placement test in calculus. They all passed. Officials at the testing company suspected the students of cheating. Mr. Escalante protested. He said the students were being rejected because they were Hispanic and from a poor school. He urged his students to take the test again. 12 of the students repeated the test, and again, all of them passed. 5 earned top scores. Mr. Escalante's students went on to become engineers, scientists, and university professors. The advanced math program at Garfield became extremely successful over the next several years. Jaime Escalante received many teaching awards, including the Presidential Medal of Excellence in Education. A movie about his success, Stand and Deliver, was released in 1988. It influenced other teachers to use his methods. Jaime Escalante retired from teaching in 1998 and later moved back to Bolivia with his wife. He died earlier last year. He was 79 years old. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Education Report. More than half of young black men in the United States do not finish high school. Many grow up without fathers and in neighborhoods with gangs, drugs, and violence. 60% of those who drop out of school have spent time in jail by the age of 35. Joe Marshall co-founded the Omega Boys Club in San Francisco, California, 23 years ago. Mr. Marshall tries to give boys and girls a safe refuge and a chance at a better future. Every week, he has two basic messages for his young students: stop the violence and don't do drugs. Mr. Marshall spent 25 years as a teacher and administrator in San Francisco. He taught math in middle school and expected to see his best students go to college. But he said a lot of his former students ended up dead or in prison for selling drugs or being involved in gangs. And many girls ended up getting pregnant. The Omega Boys Club serves more than 400 young people every year. 2 times a week, it offers after-school classes in math, reading, family and life skills, and college preparation. In many ways, it serves as a kind of family. It provides teenagers with structure and support. Joe Marshall has a doctorate in psychology. He sees gangs and violence as a disease that needs to be dealt with as a public health problem. He tells young people to follow some new rules for living. These rules will decrease their chances of ending up dead or in prison and increase their chances of staying alive and free. The club represents the headquarters of what he calls the Alive and Free movement. But his most effective way to spread his anti-violence message is through radio. In 1991, Joe Marshall started Street Soldiers, a weekly call-in show. It airs on popular hip-hop station KMEL in San Francisco. Marlena was one of the graduates of the Omega Boys Club. She is at Southern University right now, going into her 3rd year. She talked about what she had learned by coming to Omega. The club provides guidance and financial assistance to help students stay in school. Over 90% of members who were accepted into college have graduated. 12 other American cities have copied the program. Joe Marshall has been invited to speak in Canada, Nigeria, South Africa, and Thailand. He turned 63 this year. He says he has no thoughts of retiring anytime soon. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report. This is the VOA Special English Education Report. More than 40 of the 50 American states have approved what are known as the Common Core State Standards. These are lists of content that students are supposed to learn at each grade level from kindergarten to high school. State governors and schools chiefs led the effort to develop the standards. The project involved teachers, administrators, experts, and public comments. The final standards were released in June of 2010. Acceptance is voluntary, but acceptance helped states that entered President Obama's $4 billion Race to the Top competition for school reform. The standards are for English language arts and math. Supporters say these provide clear goals to prepare students to succeed in college and in jobs. But critics of national standards say the idea goes against one of America's oldest traditions, local control of education. Political conservatives generally oppose federal intervention in schools. Yet it was a Republican President, George W. Bush, who expanded testing requirements to show that public schools are making yearly progress. Still, opponents of national standards call them one-size-fits-all. They say the idea does not make sense for a country as large and diverse as the United States. One of those opponents is Bill Evers at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University in California. He was an assistant education secretary under President Bush. Mr. Evers warns about closing the door on innovation by locking in a national uniform bureaucratic system. He says the states don't have a problem in setting their curriculum. They've been doing it ever since there have been public schools. Richard Riley was Education Secretary to President Bill Clinton, a Democrat. Mr. Riley says conservatives would be concerned if we had federal mandated Common Core standards. That's not what we have. It's a state-driven measure. High standards, challenging work for young people across the country. Mr. Riley says in the 1990s, he pushed states to develop their own statewide standards. But some of those standards were not very strong, he says, so he believes national standards are needed. But Bill Evers says technology now makes it easier to develop individual learning plans for students. He says schools should worry less about a common curriculum and more about improving teacher quality. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can find a link to the Common Core Standards at voaspecialenglish.com. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. Last week, we talked about the conflict between sleepy teenagers and early morning classes. Many people commented on our website and Facebook page. For example, Damla Ece in Turkey wrote, "I agree with the idea of starting lessons later so teenagers can feel better in the morning. But sleeping more than 7 hours can be wasting time for students." Tron in Vietnam disagreed. "I think teenagers, on the average, need 8 to 10 hours of sleep every day. It's useless trying to force them to concentrate while they can't concentrate." Enilton Nemakes in Brazil goes to sleep late and wakes up in the afternoon and wrote, "That's my life, but at least I am studying." Afshin Haydari from Tehran says schools should start early to avoid heavy traffic later in the morning. And Susie from Jordan wrote, "When I was a teenager, I enjoyed taking my courses as early as possible. That way, I could find a long time in the day to do my own activities." But Azra from Kyrgyzstan said the reason schools start early there is a lack of classrooms. Omid in Afghanistan calls teenagers the destiny makers of a society. So they must be more alert and active in order to be more successful. And Joruji in Japan wrote, "When I was a teenager, I used to get up before 6 to go to school, which was far from home, and I don't remember having problems. I think nowadays the internet, TV, games, and cell phones make teens go to sleep later." 30-year-old Kika in Spain says, "In my opinion, young people are very lazy." But Dennis Jin disagrees. He says for high school students in China, we must reach class at 6:20 in the morning and be back home usually at 10 in the evening. Then we'll have some extra schoolwork to do. Teenagers are not the only ones who suffer. Kathy in Canada wrote, "My daughter likes complaining about everything in the morning, and I know that this is from lack of sleep. I wish schools should change their start time to 8:30 or 9 a.m. Vidara Mom, a Cambodian living in New Zealand, says school starts at 9 and finishes at 3 p.m. Therefore, the students have heaps of time to interact and play before they go home." Wibi Sebastian from Indonesia wishes school started at 7:30 instead of 7, but tells students don't forget to eat breakfast. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Some schools in the United States and other countries offer Chinese language classes with government support from China. St. Mary's School is a private college preparatory school in Medford, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest. Carly Irvine is in her 4th year of learning Mandarin. She says, "Since China and America are working so closely and our relationship is growing more and more, I think it will be very important in the future to know Chinese." St. Mary's also teaches Spanish, German, and Latin. It added Mandarin in 2005. 2 years ago, it became the first school in the country to join the Confucius Classroom program. The program pays about half the costs of a teacher sent to the school in the United States. China's education ministry also provides books and other materials. St. Mary's principal, Frank Phillips, says knowing Chinese will help students in a world where China is quickly gaining economic power. But he admits to concerns in his local community. He says, "The question I always get is this a gigantic propaganda move? Is this an evil communist plot on the part of China? From what I can detect, having been involved in it for 2 years, I see none of that. In fact, the program has won the support of his local representative in the state legislature. Dennis Richardson says he has concerns about human rights in China, but he is among several lawmakers who have been pushing for more Chinese language education in public schools in Oregon. Young Ling, a teacher at St. Mary's, came from China in 2008. She says, "People do not know much about China, especially the latest development. So I think this is a chance for them to know more about China, what China is really like. It's quite different from what it was 20 years ago." The Confucius Classroom program is in about 40 countries, including more than 50 American schools and universities. A recent report said more schools in the United States are teaching Chinese and Arabic, although the numbers are still low. But it said foreign language teaching in public elementary and middle schools dropped sharply in recent years. Some schools say a federal law that only measures progress in math and reading has hurt language teaching. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report.